My ex-fiancé and sister secretly mortgaged my parents' house while Dad was having heart surgery. Jake's eyes darted between us. Morgan, what's this about? They found out about the mortgage and the transfers. Morgan's voice was tight. Something passed between them. A look I recognized from having been with Jake for 6 years. It was his, oh, shitty, we're caught expression. You'd better sit down, he said, slipping into the smooth, professional demeanor I'd once found so attractive. This is all a misunderstanding that I can easily clear up. I am not interested in your explanations, Mom said coldly. I want to see the financial records, all of them. Jake hesitated before opening a folder on his laptop. Of course, just let me pull everything up. Mom and I exchanged glances as he tapped away at his keyboard, occasionally whispering something to Morgan that I couldn't hear. Here we go, he finally said, turning the laptop toward us. This is the complete record of your finances for the past 2 years, Diane. As you can see, Frank's business has been struggling significantly. The Sized showed declining revenue for Dad's hardware store with increasingly worrying monthly losses. Frank didn't want to worry you, Jake continued. He asked Morgan and me to help manage things, to find ways to keep the business afloat. By taking out a mortgage on our house without telling me? Mom asked incredulously. The business needed an infusion of capital. The mortgage was the most logical source. And where did that money go? I asked, scanning the budget, because I am not seeing $200,000 in business improvements. Jake scrolled to a different section. Some went to business expenses, some to medical bills, and some to investments to generate additional income. What investments? He clicked to another tab, showing a series of stock purchases, diversified portfolio, blue chip stocks, some growth potential in tech, a bit in crypto. Mom's face had gone from shocked to thunderous. We don't invest in the stock market, Frank, and I have always been conservative with our money, which is why you were headed for financial disaster, Morgan interjected. Dad's business is failing, Mom. Seven had to do something. That someone should have been your father and me making informed decisions together, Mom retorted. Not you two going behind our backs, I continued examining the budget. Something not adding up. These investment records don't match the transfers I saw. Here is still over $30,000 unaccounted for. Jake shifted uncomfortably. There were other expenses, consulting fees, financial management. You paid yourself to mismanage my parents' money? I cut in incredulous. It wasn't like that. Jake has expertise. He deserves compensation for his time. And what about the credit cards? Mom asked. 3 new cards in Frank's name that he knows nothing about. Morgan and Jake exchanged another glance. Emergency purrit, Jake said smoothly, in case you needed funds quickly. With $15,000 in combined balances, I challenged. What emergencies were those? Before either could answer, my phone rang, the hospital's number flashing on the screen. My stomach dropped as I answered. Miss Gregory, this is Nurse Chen from Philadelphia General. Your father has experienced a complication. Dr. Patel has requested that you come in right away. What kind of complication? I asked, my voice tight. There appears to be fluid building up around his heart. They're preparing to take him back to surgery. I'll be right there. I hung up looking at Mom and Morgan. We need to go. Dad's being taken back into surgery. Mom's face went white. What? Why? Fluid around his heart? They're prepping him now? Morgan stood immediately. I'll drive. No. Mom and I said simultaneously. I'll drive, I added firmly. Mom, you can come with me, Morgan. Do whatever you want. The drive to the hospital was tense, Mom alternating between silent prayer and frantic questions I couldn't answer. We found Dr. Patel in the cardiac care unit, his expression grave. What happened? I asked. Precardial effusion fluid accumulating in the sac around the heart. It's a known but uncommon complication after bypass surgery. He led us to a quiet corner. We need to drain the fluid immediately. He's being prepped for a pericardiocentesis procedure. Is it serious? Mom asked, her voice trembling. Yes, but we caught it relatively early. The procedure is straightforward but not without risks. We'll insert a needle through the chest wall to drain the fluid. Will he need open heart surgery again? I asked. We're hoping to avoid that. The needle procedure should be sufficient if performed promptly. A nurse approached. Dr. Patel, they're ready. He nodded. I'll update you as soon as we're finished. The procedure typically takes about an hour. As he left, Morgan arrived, Jake trailing behind her. I stiffened at the sight of my ex-fiancé in the waiting room. What's he doing here? I demanded. He drove me, Morgan said defensively, and he cares about Dad too. Like hell he does. Maya, please, Mom interjected. Not now. Jake approached cautiously. Diane, I just want to say, save it. Mom cut him off, her voice ice cold. My husband is fighting for his life right now because of stress that you and Morgan contributed to. I don't want to hear anything from either of you. Morgan looked shocked. Mom, that's not fair. Fair. Mom's voice rose slightly. Was it fair to exploit your father's trust? To make medical decisions that compromised his care? To take out loans in our name without our knowledge? Jake stepped forward. Diane, I understand you are upset, but I assure you everything we did was with Frank's best interests at heart. His best interests or yours? Mom turned to face him fully. What kind of man sleeps with his fiancée Refec's sister, then helps that sister steal from her parents? Jake paled. That's not what happened. I can explain everything. I don't want your explanations. I want both of you to leave. He's my father too, Morgan protested, tears welling in her eyes. And you should have thought of that before you started treating him like your personal A-team, I said coldly. A throat cleared behind us. Ryan stood there in his PT uniform, his expression concerned. I heard about Mr. Gregory. I came as soon as my shift ended. Relief flooded through me at the sight of him. Ryan, thank you. Jake's eyes narrowed. Who's this? Dad's physical therapist, I said shortly. The one whose treatment plan you decided was too expensive. Ryan nodded politely to everyone but focused on me. How is he? They're draining fluid from around his heart, pericardial effusion. That's serious but treatable if caught early. He glanced at the others. Would you like me to come back later? This seems like a family moment. No, I said quickly. Please stay. We all sat in uneasy silence in the waiting room, the tension thick enough to cut Mom, kept her gaze fixed on the doors leading to the procedure room, her lips moving in silent prayer. Morgan and Jake whispered to each other occasionally while Ryan sat beside me, a solid calming presence. After what felt like eternity, Dr. Patel emerged, still in his surgical gown. The procedure went well, he announced. We drained approximately 300 cc of fluid from the pericardial sac. His heart function is already improving. Mom sagged with relief. Thank God. He'll need close monitoring for the next 24 to 48 hours to ensure the fluid doesn't reaccumulate. If all goes well, we can still proceed with discharge in a few days, but with increased follow-up care. I glanced pointedly at Morgan. The original PT plan will be reinstated, correct? Absolutely, Dr. Patel confirmed. Daily sessions for at least the first 2 weeks are non-negotiable at this point. Will the insurance cover it? Morgan asked, seemingly oblivious to the irony of her question. I've already spoken with the insurance company, I said. Dad's policy is being restored to its original level effective immediately? They're also investigating the unauthorized changes. Morgan paled. You had no right. Actually, I did. Dad gave me medical and financial power of attorney this morning. Dr. Pata looked uncomfortable with the family tension. Mr. Gregory will be in recovery for about an hour, then return to ICU. You can see him briefly once he's settled. After he left, the silence returned heavier than before. Ryan excused himself to check on another patient, squeezing my hand discreetly before leaving. Jake finally broke the silence. Diane Testich, I know this looks bad, but here is a reasonable explanation for everything, such as, Mom asked, her voice eerily calm. He didn't want to worry you, so he asked us to help. Maybe we overstepped, but we were trying to prevent you from losing everything by stealing from them, I challenged. Not stealing, relocating resources for greater returns. He adopted his financial advisor tone. Your parents are better off now than they would have been otherwise. Mom stood up, her small frame somehow imposing. I want a full accounting of every penny by tomorrow morning, and I want the mortgage documents, the credit card statements, and access to all accounts you created in our names. Jake nodded quickly. And then, Mom continued, I want you both to stay away from Frank until he's recovered. The doctor made it clear that stress could kill him, and right now you two are his biggest stressors. Morgan's face crumpled. Mom, please. He's my dad. I love him. If you loved him, Mom said coldly, you wouldn't have put money above his health. I'd never seen my mother so fierce, so unyielding. The woman who had always made excuses for Morgan, who had urged me to forgive the unforgivable, was finally drawing a line. When we were allowed to see Dad briefly in the EBUO, he was groggy but alert. Mom held his hand, speaking softly about how well the procedure had gone, carefully avoiding any mention of Morgan or the financial situation. Here is Morgan, he asked weakly. Mom and I exchanged glances. She's in the waiting room, I said. The doctor said only 2 visitors at a time. He nodded, seeming to accept this. You two working together now, good? Mom smiled tremulously. Yes, we are. Everything's going to be fine, Frank. You just focus on getting better. Later in the hallway, Mom gripped my arm. I don't want him to know yet. About the money, the mortgage, not until he's stronger. I agree. But we need to address it, Mom, all of it. She nodded suddenly, looking every one of her 60 years. I know, and we will, but one crisis at a time. I drove Mom home, both of us exhausted from the day's emotional roller coaster. Morgan had left with Jake after being told she couldn't see Dad, her tearful protests falling on deaf ears at the house. I made tea while Mom called relatives with updates on Dad's condition. When she finally sat at the kitchen table, cradling her mug, she looked both fragile and determined. I should have seen it, she said softly. The signs were there. Don't blame yourself. Morgan and Jake were deliberate in their deception, not just about the money. Mom met my eyes, about everything. I always made excuses for her behavior, her choices. I thought I was being a good mother by supporting her unconditionally. She shook her head. Instead, I helped create the situation. Mom, no. Let me finish. When you told us what happened with Jake, I should have believed you. I should have stood by you. Instead, I tried to smooth things over, just like I always did with Morgan. The acknowledgement so long in coming brought tears to my eyes. Mom was quiet for a long moment. Morgan reminds me so much of my sister, your Aunt Catherine, beautiful, charming, always getting into scrapes that others had to fix. Catherine died young, you know, before you were born. Car accident after a night of partying. She wiped away a tear. When Morgan was born, it was like getting a second chance. I couldn't bear to see her fail or face consequences, so you protected her at my expense? Yes. Mom reached for my hand across the table. I am so sorry, Tazis. I failed you as a mother. The simple apology, unqualified and direct, unlocked something in my chest that had been tightly wound for years. I squeezed her hand, unable to speak through my tears. We sat like that for a long time. The silence between us no longer strained but healing. Finally, I asked, what do we do now about Morgan and Jake? Mom straightened her shoulders. We protect your father, we fix what they've broken, and we make sure they face consequences for their actions. Legal consequences, if necessary, yes. Her voice was firm. What they did was wrong. Shast, morally and legally wrong. I've been blind for too long, but not anymore. The Mom I'd known my whole life. Conflict, avoidant, peace at any price. Mom was gone. In her place was a woman I barely recognized but instantly respected. I'll help in any way I can, I promised. What about your job in Seattle, your life there? I hesitated, thinking about my apartment, my colleagues, the life I'd built 3,000 miles away. I'll take a leave of absence. Dad's recovery and sorting out this mess are more important right now. Mom nodded gratefully. And that young man at the hospital, Ryan, he seems very nice. I felt my cheeks warm. He's been incredibly helpful with Dad's care. Just helpful? She raised an eyebrow, a ghost of her former self showing through. With everything going on, you are trying to match make. She smiled faintly. Old habits, but he does look at you a certain way. I rolled my eyes, but couldn't help smiling back. We're friends. He's been a good support during all this. Sometimes support is exactly what we need. Shim to stand beside us when things get difficult. She squeezed my hand. I should have been that for you after what happened with Jake. You are being that now, I said softly. That's what matters. As I went upstairs to my old bedroom, I checked my phone to find a text from Ryan. How's your dad doing, and how are you holding up? I sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly exhausted, but needing to connect with someone outside the family drama. I called rather than texted. Hey, he answered immediately. Everything okay, Dad? Stable. The procedure went well. I took a deep breath, but everything else is a mess. Want to talk about it? I found myself pouring out the whole story, the confrontation at Morgan's apartment, Jake's pathetic explanations, Mom's transformation from enabler to defender. Sounds like a breakthrough, Ryan observed when I finished. Painful but necessary. That's exactly it. Like lancing a boil that's been festering for years. I approve. I laughed, the sound surprising me after such an intense day. Sorry to dump all this on you. You signed up to be Dad's PT, not my therapist. I don't mind. His voice was warm. I like listening to you. The simple statement made my heart beat a little faster. Ryan, too forward. He sounded suddenly uncertain. Sorry, I didn't mean to. No, it's not that. It's just complicated. My life is a disaster right now, and I live in Seattle and we barely know each other. All valid points. How about this? Let's just be friends who happen to enjoy each other's company. No pressure, no expectations. I'd like that, I admitted. I could use a friend right now. Then a friend you shall have. One who occasionally brings you decent hospital coffee and listens to your family drama without judgment. I smiled into the phone. That sounds perfect. As I lay in bed that night, I thought about how much had changed in just 1 week. I'd come back reluctantly, determined to keep my emotional distance from everyone and everything in Philadelphia. Now I was fully immersed in the most difficult family crisis imaginable, with no clear end in sight. But for the first time since finding that earring in Jake's sheets, I didn't feel alone. I had Mom, newly awakened to Morgan's true nature. I had Dad, who'd always been on my side, and I had Ryan, an unexpected ally in the storm. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, medical, legal, financial, emotional. But tonight, despite everything, I felt something close to peace. Number Chapter 7. New mutations. 3 weeks passed in a blur of hospital visits, lawyer appointments, and financial damage control. Dad's recovery proceeded steadily, though slower than we'd hoped. The fluid didn't return around his heart, but he developed a minor infection at one of the incision sites, extending his hospital stay. Mom and I formed an unlikely but effective team. She handled the daily hospital routine and coordination with extended family, while I tackled the financial mess Morgan and Jake had created. What we discovered was worse than we'd initially thought. Beyond the second mortgage and credit cards, they'd emptied Dad's retirement account, redirected business income, and even sold some of Mom's jewelry, replaced with convincing fakes that she'd never noticed. All told, they'd siphoned nearly $400,000 over 18 months. Our lawyer, a stern woman named Patricia Holden, didn't mince words. This is criminal financial exploitation. We have more than enough evidence for charges. Mom had hesitated. They're still family who stole from you systematically and compromised Frank's medical care, Patricia reminded her. What would you do if someone else had done this to you? In the end, we took a middle path. We gave Morgan and Jake an ultimatum: return every penny and sign legally binding agreements never to access our parents' finances again or face criminal charges. They chose the former, though not without protests and excuses. The confrontation happened in Patricia's office with Morgan and Jake, accompanied by their own attorney, a slick corporate type who clearly wasn't used to being on the defensive. My clients acknowledged some administrative overreach, he began smoothly, but their intentions were honorable. They were trying to help the Gregorys through a difficult financial period by stealing from them, Patricia countered, by opening fraudulent credit accounts, by selling Mrs. Gregory's jewelry and replacing it with fakes. Morgan burst into tears. We were going to pay it all back. With what? I asked. The money from your wedding? The money from Dad's business? Jake placed a restraining hand on Morgan's arm. We made some mistakes in how we handled things. We're prepared to make amends. Amends isn't enough, Mom said quietly but firmly. We want everything returned and legal assurances this will never happen again. Their attorney tried to negotiate, but Patricia was implacable. By the end of the meeting, Morgan and Jake had signed agreements to repay everything within 90 days, with their assets as collateral. They also signed no contact orders, agreeing to stay away from my parents for 6 months. As we left the office, Morgan caught up to me in the hallway. Mia, please, don't do this. Do what? Hold you accountable? It's long overdue, Morgan. You are destroying our family. Her perfect makeup was streaked with tears. Is this really what you want? To tear us apart? You did that, I said evenly. You and Jake, you made your choices because of a stupid mistake, because I fell in love with the wrong man. I stared at her, seeing not the sister I'd grown up with, but a stranger. This isn't about Jake, not anymore. This is about you stealing from our parents when Dad was facing life-threatening surgery. This is about you choosing money over his health. That's not fair. I was trying to help. No, you were helping yourself as usual. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. You know what the sad part is, Morgan? If you just come to Mom and Dad honestly, told them the business was struggling, asked for help with your finances, they would have given you anything. They always did, but instead you lied, you stole, you betrayed them in the worst possible way. Her face crumpled. I never meant to hurt anyone, but you did, and now you have to live with the consequences. I turned to leave, then paused. One more thing, stay away from Ryan. I've seen you watching him, calculating. He's off limits, she flinched, confirming my suspicion that she'd already been eyeing him as a potential ally or something more. So there is something between you two. That's none of your business. Just like Mom and Dad's finances are none of your business anymore. The day Dad was finally discharged from the hospital was sunny and unseasonably warm for Philadelphia in April. Ryan helped us navigate the complex discharge instructions and home care setup, going above and beyond his professional responsibilities. You don't have to do all this, I told him as we arranged the rental hospital bed in what had been Dad's home office. I know. He adjusted the height of the bed with practiced efficiency. I want to. We'd settled into an easy friendship over the past weeks, meeting for coffee between his shifts, texting about Dad's progress, occasionally catching dinner when our schedules aligned. I'd been careful to keep things platonic, mindful of my impending return to Seattle and the complications of my family situation. But that didn't stop the flutter in my stomach when he smiled at me, or the way my day brightened when I saw his name on my phone. Dad settled into his recovery routine at home, grumbling about the restrictions but faithfully doing his exercises. Mom transformed into the perfect nurse. Mona transformed into the perfect nurse, monitoring his medications, preparing heart-healthy meals, and fussing over every detail of his care. She's driving me crazy, Dad confided one afternoon as we sat on the back porch. Yesterday she measured my salt intake in micrograms. I laughed. She loves you. Let her fuss. I know. He gazed across the backyard, his expression softening. Your mother's stronger than I gave her credit for. The way she's handled everything with Morgan. It surprised me too. Shouldn't have. She was always strong, just in a different way than you or me. He glanced at me. Speaking of surprises, what's going on with you and that physical therapist? Ryan, we're friends. Friends who look at each other the way you two do. Dad, please. I am leaving for Seattle in 2 weeks. Are you? I thought your leave of absence was for 2 months. I shifted uncomfortably. It is, but everything's under control here now. You are recovering. The financial situation is being sorted out. The business has a plan going forward. And what's waiting for you in Seattle? The question caught me off guard. My job, my apartment, friends, community, a sense of belonging. I frowned. I've been there 6 months, Dad. I am still building those things. And how's that going? He asked gently. The truth was, I'd built a functional life in Seattle, but not a fulfilling one. I had colleagues rather than friends, an apartment rather than a home, routines rather than roots. I needed to get away, I said defensively. After what happened with Jake and Morgan, I know you did. And maybe you still need that distance. Dad took my hand, but running away from pain is different from running toward healing. One is a reaction, the other is a choice. I considered his words. When did you get so wise? Heart surgery puts things in perspective, he smiled wryly. Also, nearly being bankrupted by your daughter and future son-in-law tends to clarify what's important. We sat in comfortable silence, watching birds flit between the trees. Ryan seems like a good man, Dad said eventually. He is. Good men are rare, Tessage Bear. Just something to think about. The following week, a certified letter arrived for Morgan, the first communication since the meeting at the lawyer's office. Unfiled was a cashier's check for $50,000 and a brief note, first installment. The rest will follow as promised. I am sorry, Morgan. No excuses, no dramatic declarations, no emotional manipulation. Just 3 simple words that seemed for once genuine. I showed the letter to Mom, who read it with a complicated expression. Do you think she means it? The apology? I don't know, maybe. I placed the check on the kitchen counter, but at least she's honoring the repayment agreement. moment. I never thought it would come to this, Mom said softly. My own daughter? I hesitated, then asked the question that had been on my mind. Do you think you'll ever forgive her? Mom considered this carefully. Forgiveness isn't the same as restoration of trust. I may eventually forgive Morgan, but I don't know if I'll ever trust her again. She looked at me. What about you? Could you ever forgive her? Or Jake? Jake, no. He knew exactly what he was doing, both with the affair and the financial exploitation. I thought about Morgan, my sister, my childhood playmate, my lifelong rival. Morgan, maybe someday, not now. That's fair, Mom said. More than fair given everything. As the day of my departure for Seattle approached, I found myself increasingly reluctant to leave. Dad was doing well but still needed regular PT sessions and medical follow-ups. The business was stabilizing with the help of a consultant, but many decisions remained, and then there was Ryan. The night before my scheduled flight, he invited me to dinner at a small Italian restaurant near the hospital. To celebrate your dad's progress, he said, and to say goodbye, I guess. The restaurant was cozy and intimate with candles on the tables and a quiet hum of conversation. We talked about everything except my impending departure, Dad's recovery milestones, Ryan's favorite patients, a movie we'd both seen recently. Over dessert tiramisu that we shared, Ryan finally broached the subject. So, tomorrow's the day. I nodded, pushing the mascarpone around with my fork. My flight's at 2 p.m. Seattle awaits. Yes, I met his eyes across the table. I don't know what I would have done without you these past weeks. He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes, just doing my job. No, it was more than that. You went above and beyond professionally and personally. He reached across the table for my hand. I've enjoyed every minute with you with Sash, even the difficult ones. I felt my throat tighten with emotion. Me too, which makes this harder. He took a deep breath. I like you a lot, more than I probably should after knowing you for such a short time. My heart raced. Ryan, let me finish. I know you are leaving. I know you have a life in Seattle. I am not asking you to stay or change your plans. He squeezed my hand. I just wanted you to know how I feel. No pressure, no expectations. I stared at our intertwined fingers on the table. I like you too, but my life is complicated right now. I am still dealing with the aftermath of everything with Jake and Morgan. I've barely begun to process it all. I looked up at him. And you deserve someone who can give you more than half-healed baggage. What if I don't mind the baggage? He smiled gently. Everyone has some, Tajish. I've got my own, believe me. It wouldn't be fair to you. Why don't you let me decide what's fair for me? He leaned forward. I am not proposing marriage here. I am just saying I'd like to see where this might go from 3,000 miles away. People make long-distance work all the time, or he hesitated. You could consider staying? Not for me, but for all the reasons that have been making you reluctant to leave. The suggestion hung between us both, tempting and terrifying. Stay in Philadelphia, the city I'd fled from, where every street corner held memories of my life with Jake, where Morgan's betrayal still felt raw. I can't make that decision tonight, I said finally. I know. And I am not asking you to. Ryan paid the bill despite my protests. Just think about it, that's all. He walked me to my car, the night air cool against my flushed skin. At the driver's door he hesitated, then leaned in and kissed me softly, briefly, a question rather than a demand. When he pulled back, I found myself following, prolonging the moment. His arms went around me, and for a few perfect minutes the complicated reality of my life faded away. Eventually we separated, both a little breathless. I began. Yeah, he agreed, resting his forehead against mine. I drove home in a daze, my mind whirling with possibilities and fears. The house was quiet when I arrived, Mom and Dad already asleep. I went to my childhood bedroom and began the half-hearted packing I'd been putting off as I folded clothes into my suitcase. I realized I was going through the motions without conviction. The thought of returning to my sterile Seattle apartment, to my job that I liked but didn't love, to a city where I knew no one. It felt hollow, but staying in Philadelphia meant facing all I'd run from. It meant rebuilding, not escaping. It meant potential heartbreak if things with Ryan didn't work out. It meant having to eventually deal with Morgan beyond the legal agreements and financial repayments. I sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the decision before me. My phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. All packed for tomorrow, let me know when you land. Instead of responding, I called her. Despite the late hour, she answered immediately. What's wrong? She asked, concern evident in her voice. Everything. Nothing. I don't know. I flopped back on the bed. I don't know if I can leave. Your parents, are they okay? They're fine. Dad's recovery is going well. The financial situation is being resolved. I sighed. It's more complicated than that. The hot physical therapist, Zoe guessed partly. We had dinner tonight, and he told me he has feelings for me. And you've got feelings for him too, she concluded. So what's the problem? The problem is that I built a life in Seattle. I have a job, an apartment, a job you barely mentioned in 6 months, and an apartment you've never once referred to as home. Maya, you went to Seattle to escape, that's valid. But is it still what you need? I thought about Dad's words about running away versus running towards something. I don't know. What's keeping you there, Bronte? Independence? Proving I can make it on my own, not letting Jake and Morgan win by driving me away? I realized how contradictory that sounded. I know it doesn't make sense. Actually, it does. You wanted to prove something to yourself and you did. You survived. You built a life from scratch. But surviving isn't the same as thriving. Zoe's voice softened. Maybe it's time to stop punishing yourself for what they did. I'm not punishing myself, aren't you? By denying yourself connections, roots, possibilities, all because they betrayed you? Her words hit close to home. I had been keeping myself isolated in Seattle, viewing any emotional vulnerability as a potential weakness. I'm scared, Zoe, of making the wrong choice, of getting hurt again. You can't control everything. We talked until the early hours, exploring possibilities, fears, hopes. By the time we hung up, the sky was beginning to lighten, and I'd made my decision. I went downstairs and made coffee, waiting for my parents to wake up. Dad appeared first, moving slowly but steadily with his walker. You are up early, he observed, accepting the cup I offered him. Nervous about the flight? About that? I took a deep breath. I've been thinking about extending my leave of absence, maybe indefinitely. His eyes lit up, but he kept his tone measured. Oh, here's nothing really pulling me back to Seattle, and here is a lot keeping me here, you and Mom, the business. I hesitated, and maybe something new.